Especially you guys.
Wait, is this being filmed?
This is being filmed. Sit up or you'll be off it. Alright, afternoon Year 9, Year 10 and Judges. A lot of Year 10 has participated in this last term. They saw what the pressure's like up here, so I'm sure you'll understand where these people are at the moment. Year 9, you're watching this because next year you're doing this. Okay, so you can be part of the research team or the speaker team, but you'll see what it's on about next year. So please show these guys the courtesy that you'd like to be shown. Okay, they've put a lot of work into this. And I've got to say about my classes, win or lose, I'm really proud of the way that you prepared for this. Okay, and how I've seen you grow through this process, both of my teams. I'm sure Mr. Clayton thinks the same as you guys, probably. Okay. Without much more ado, the speakers will introduce their teams. They'll introduce the topic for you. So there's not too much I've got to say. There's no electronics for the research team, so they are allowed to come up and post notes for these people. They will get a ring at 3 minutes. From Jackson over here at 4 minutes, it's absolute cut off this year, so it's a little bit tighter than it was for Year 10s last semester. Maddie. The order for the debate was a coin toss. So we've got Maddie starting for the affirmative team. No, the negative team, sorry. My first mistake. This time round.
Starting for the affirmative?
No, we're the negative.
They can start.
It's we're just going, and we've got teams of 4. I know it's not.
4's okay. Start with me.
All right.
Let's start with affirmative
Yeah,
then.
let's do that.
It's probably
We
one
can
side
it
of
anyway. We can do that for the second time round. So, all right. Thank you, everyone. Go for it.
Should Australia install a high-speed rail between Melbourne and Sydney? This argument has been debated for about 50 years with no action taken. Think about that for a moment. If there is that much doubt over the issue, why go through with it? Good afternoon, judges, Miss Morgan, Mr. Fish, and Mrs. Wells, students and teachers. My name is Maddie Irving, and I am here with my team to oppose the idea of the high-speed rail from Melbourne to Sydney. First off, I am going to introduce the speakers and give a brief overview of our arguments. Then our second speaker, George Schweitzer, will be talking about the costs included with building this high-speed rail. Our third speaker, Danny Webber, will be talking about the environmental impacts this project will cause. And our final speaker, Kimberly DeJong, will be summing up and tying our arguments together. Mr. Cleary from Consolidated Land and Rail Australia has said for 50 years it has been debated, and certainly it's the feeling of most people that it's a great idea that will never happen. If it's really such a great idea, why hasn't this project been started yet? Because as the second part of his message said, it will never happen. Having a high-speed rail is not going to help Australia. Instead, it will not only pulverise the countryside and the environment, but it will also cause incredible straining on Australia's economy. The speed rail is an unnecessary expense that is only wanted because some short-tempered plane travellers are sick of being in the air. First world problems much? The 14 will argue population, so let's look into that argument. In European countries such as Germany, they have a very successful high-speed rail system. But Australia and Europe are extremely different. Think of the population density of Australia compared to Germany, for example. Australia has 3.1 people per square kilometre, where Germany has 229 people per square kilometre. Starting to see where I'm coming from? This being the case, Australia does not have a high demand for more transport. In fact, we have close to no demand for extra transport, as planes are a much better alternative. They are faster, cheaper, more efficient, and don't put any extra stress on the economy. Seriously, to build an airport, it will cost under $2.5 billion. To build one speed rail track alone, it will cost over $50 billion. The Australian government claims that they will be paying for these high expenses needed for this project, which in turn affects the whole of Australia, as everyone will have to pay higher tax rates. The high-speed rail will supposedly cost between $50 to $70 billion, take at least 50 years to make. Let those numbers sink in. We live on the coast, 7 hours from Melbourne, 6 hours from Sydney. Do you really want to pay taxes for something that you may never use? And imagine how the people of states other than New South Wales, Victoria and the ACT are feeling about paying for it. This high-speed rail is an expensive luxury that we do not need. It is bad for the environment, and the environment creates an even bigger risk for the train. Think of the wombats and the kangaroos. Other countries with speed rails in place don't have to worry about these animals, as they aren't an obstruction in any other countries. But with a 320 km/h speed rail wiping out their populations, they're not going to live in Australia either. Picture this, an animal only found in Australia, such as a kangaroo, wallaby or possum, minding their own business. They see some nice food on the track, they go over and boom, smashed by the incredible force that will not only obliterate the already possibly endangered animal, but also derail the train, causing fatalities to be plenty. This train will drive our futures off the rails. Thank you.
Good afternoon, judges, teachers, and misled opponents. My name is Emily Lucas, and I am here with my team, Annabelle, Madison, and Alex, to prove that building a high-speed railway will benefit Australia. We, the Affirmative team, disagree with our opposition, as we believe the economic benefits will outweigh the cost of building the high-speed railway. My first question to our opposition is, how can we afford not to? This issue has been under discussion since the early 1980s, but like the Independent Education Union's Improved Enterprise Agreement, it's about time. About time we got this done. Today, as your first speaker, I will address the benefits of the railway for rural and regional areas, the change in the tourism industry because of the railway, and the advantages of renewable energy. Our second speaker, Alex, will address the financial and economic benefits. Our third speaker, Annabelle, will discuss the efficiency and safety of the trains. And finally, our fourth speaker, Madison, will cover the environmental factors in urban areas. Firstly, just to contradict a statement previously made by our opposition, the population in Australia will increase by 20% by the time the high-speed rail is built at around 2050. High-speed rail will change the way Australians live and work, as living and working in different states was once thought to be impossible, but this could be the reality of the future. While the railway will not only be creating a high-speed public transport service, it will also be linking up cities with major regional areas. This will create endless employment and education opportunities for the residents of regional places. This will also precipitate significant growth within the regional areas while relieving substantial population growth from our major cities. Therefore, more people would live closer to railway stations rather than cities. The railway would improve employment opportunities in towns that would normally struggle to find local employment, as within a few short hours, our opposition could have caught a high-speed train into the city to attend work, school or university, and this was something that was once thought to be impossible for small towns located hours away from the larger cities. Secondly, a high-speed rail would create a whole new tourism attraction for international and national travellers. With millions of people exploring Australia each year, the high-speed railway would provide a whole new tourism route for travellers. A route that would not only go through the major cities, but take travellers to the heart of rural Australia. Instead of flying 33,000 feet above the ground in an aeroplane, these trains would give its passengers front row seats to some of the most unique landscapes and regional places in Australia, places most people would have never seen before. Therefore, this will reduce the amount of cars travelling on major highways between the cities, and in turn, the train will expose people to major regional areas, boosting their local businesses, housing market and hospitality industry. Third and finally, renewable energy-driven trains is the most cost-effective and environmentally safe way to power a high-speed train. Wind power is one of the most recent and successful renewable energy sources used to power trains today. Wind power has been successfully used in the Netherlands, as their railway operator has successfully used wind energy to power 100% of their company's trains. According to the Guardian Post, studies show that running a windmill for an hour can run a train for 120 miles. And an increase in wind farms around Australia could make this possible for our railway system. In conclusion, we believe that if the high-speed railway were to be built in the future, it would change the way Australians live, work and travel. Thank you.
Ash, get your hat off and stop distracting.
Same with you, Nick.
Did you know that Australia is in debt of about $420 billion? So it makes you ask the question of why we are building a high-speed railway when we already have such a big debt. Good afternoon, judges, students and teachers. My name is George Schweitzer and I will be arguing against the proposed high-speed railway link between Sydney and Melbourne due to the gigantic cost and where they could be put elsewhere that would be more beneficial than an unnecessary railway train. One of the main reasons the high-speed railway is such a terrible idea is because of the enormous cost. The total cost is estimated to be $50 to $70 billion. This is just for one train and one track. This total has left out all of the necessary tunnelling through hills and mountains, and countless bridges needed to be built over creeks and rivers. And on top of this, more than half the budget of this project will be supplied by Australian citizens. Is this really where we want our hard-earned taxes to be spent? In October 2016, ACOSS released a new report revealing that poverty is increasing in Australia, with an estimated 2.9 million people, or 13.3% of Australia, living below the internationally accepted poverty line. The $70 billion could be better spent helping these people get on their feet and have a better life. The money could also be spent on education. According to the Sydney Morning Herald, Australia has been ranked 39 out of 41 countries in achieving a good quality education. It was found in the latest international report that Australia is falling behind in basic measures of teaching and learning. This huge amount of money could even be used to foreign aid donation from Australia. The foreign aid benchmark recommendation by the United States is 0.70% of the gross national income, yet Australia only gives 0.25%. Foreign aid tightens alliances and builds a good reputation. Now that's something that's going to improve and help make our country safe. If you take a high-speed railway from Paris to Berlin, the journey would be almost 3 hours, but if you go with a plane, it would take an hour and a half or less. The high-speed railway tickets in Germany cost 300 Australian dollars, whereas you can get plane tickets for as cheap as 100 Australian dollars. That's a third price. Although planes typically have high operational costs, particularly relating to high fuel consumption and depreciation, the train track for a high-speed railway service has a significant operational and maintenance costs. To contradict what our opposition team has said, a high-speed rail would not be stopping in rural Australia. It is going directly to Sydney, to Melbourne or Canberra with no stops, so you wouldn't actually see any of this rural Australia. A high-speed railway is a good idea for countries overseas. For example, the high-speed railway in Germany connects 32 major cities, whereas the one proposed for Australia would only be connecting 3. Also, as Maddie stated earlier, Germany has a far denser population. Germany has 229 people per square kilometre, whereas Australia barely has 3. There's just not enough people and not enough major cities for this high-speed railway to be an efficient idea. This train will drive our future off the rails. Thank you.
Thank you.
Today I will be stating how the high-speed rail costs would greatly outnumber the income it will eventually bring in. In the last couple of decades, the Australian government has been debating amongst themselves whether to build this high-speed railway or not. The main reason why it never goes through is because no one wants to directly pay for it. Granted, the costs estimated for it would be around 114 million, but this would have been stretched over a 20-year period, making its annual costs a lot lower. But who wants to pay for this? The affirmative team doesn't, and I wouldn't say the opposition does either. This is where CLARA comes in. CLARA stands for Consolidated Land and Rail Australia. They have claimed the technique called value capture, in which results in the government having to pay next to nothing for the construction of the new high-speed rail. Now, what is value capture? Value capture is a well-known technique used by many governments to offset the costs of a new transport infrastructure. For instances, the taxes paid on apartments and warehouses located near a new highway would be paid to offset the overall costs of said highway. We can apply the same technique used for this new high-speed rail, buying lands cheaply through Victoria and New South Wales, and then sell some of the lands back to developing owners to create new strings of towns following the high-speed rail. Therefore, the residents would pay patronage to the construction of the high-speed rail, bringing its overall costs down by a great deal. Dr. Anthony Pearl, a professor of urban studies and political science, has done extensive research which confirms 95% of all motorized vehicles run on oil. The world needs a way to reduce the usage of oil before it's too late, and high-speed rail is the solution. Now, the other team may feel comfortable with using every last drop of oil from the Earth's core, leaving us with nothing for our future. But the affirmative team believes in a more practical and realistic way to approach this issue. The government has put considerable thought into the idea of a new high-speed rail between Brisbane and Sydney, using the infamous Hyperloop instead of traditional high-speed rails. This Hyperloop is estimated to cost only 14 billion, and production would finish in the late 2020s. Other countries are also interested to build their own Hyperloop rails, such as Slovakia, Abu Dhabi, Czech Republic, France, Sweden, and Indonesia. Now, by the time the rail is estimated to be finished, oil would become a lot closer to running out, meaning the cost for plane tickets would skyrocket, meaning also that modern families wouldn't be able to afford such things. They would, however, be able to afford high-speed rail tickets, as, since they run on renewable energy, they wouldn't be changing anytime soon. After these facts and proper methods of payment, it would be naive to think that it's impossible to pay for this super rail. The thought that the only way to pay for this new high-speed rail is by raising taxes and making tickets cost more is absurd. This high-speed rail is a real possibility and not just an idea. Thank you.
Before I begin my speech, I'd just like to address what Alex just said. Alex, you stated that the CLARA project is going to help cover the cost for the high-speed railway. Well, we've done our research, and the so-called CLARA project isn't even going to cover half the cost, and majority of the cost will come from taxpayers' money. And it will cost $5,000 per Australian to build this railway system. No one wants to pay $5,000. Did you know that in 2015, 2 different species of birds became completely extinct due to incidents on a high-speed railway in Europe? According to JapanToday.com, 5,000 deer are hit each year by high-speed trains in East Asia. It has been stated by UKGuardian.com that just under 2.4 million trees were cut down in Britain last year in order for a railway line to be built. Good afternoon, audience, judges and opposing team members. My name is Danny, and for the next few minutes, I will be informing you on the negative impacts a high-speed railway will have on our environment. According to PlanetZine.com, Ralph Vertebedian has reported that the environmental challenges that the high-speed rail project will face is going to affect the cost and the time taken to construct what would be the largest infrastructure project in the nation. This heavily constructed project is going to end up being extremely harmful to our environment.
Diesel emissions from construction equipment on this project will potentially harm our air quality and cause threats to aquatic life. The risk of danger occurring on the railway will potentially harm wildlife, particularly endangered species such as possums, wombats and wallabies, including the brush-tailed wallaby and yellow-footed. Negative impacts to wetland areas will also become an issue and will eventually end up being a huge danger to our environment. According to railwaytechnology.com, the issue of animal deaths on a high-speed railway is extremely concerning. Media reported that in May 2015, a train over in East India killed almost 80 elephants on a 200-kilometre trip. And later in November that year, another incident in East India occurred when a herd of 40 elephants were killed by a high-speed railway over the course of just 3 hours. Over the past 10 years, the recorded death toll of elephants struck by trains has soared to over 400, some of these elephants being endangered. So just imagine what that is going to do to the endangered species of Australia. We're supposed to be protecting our wildlife, and a construction like this is only going to affect the growing issue in a negative way. It has been stated by the author of railsystem.com that high-speed bullet trains will only run on a completely flat surface and cannot travel on a track that is at any angle steeper than just 3 degrees. Since our land here in Australia has proven to be extremely hilly and uneven, the path that this high-speed train will travel on is going to be very steep. And because these fast trains are not designed to travel on slopes or over hills, in order for the train to be constructed, thousands of trees and bushes will have to be cut down, and our precious land will need to be dug up and remodified to create a completely flat surface for this train to travel on. The destruction of land will cause disturbance to animal habitats and severe erosion. The issue of erosion will then lead to loss of arable land, which is land used to grow crops on, and clogged and polluted waterways will increase chances of flooding. We don't need that. Obviously, there are arguments opposing that high-speed rail trains are green or environmentally friendly. But after studying this topic and looking into all the facts, I'm sure you will agree that this is only an opinion, not a fact. And to say that constructing a high-speed railway line between Melbourne and Sydney would be beneficial to our environment is clearly not the case. This train will drive our future off the rails. Thank you.
My name is Annabelle Kinnis, and today I will be addressing the proven factors of efficiency and safety of a high-speed rail from Melbourne to Sydney. Which transport system is the most energy efficient? Transport Sustainability Professor David Bannister looked in depth at this. He studied the energy of vehicles as they carry a person a particular distance. He then graphed a transport energy efficiency table demonstrating the megajoules consumed per passenger kilometre. His results concluded that walking consumed 0.16 megajoules, cars 2.10 megajoules, aircraft 2.42 megajoules, and electric rail 1.65 megajoules per passenger kilometre. This 1.65 megajoules per passenger kilometre overwhelmingly shows that rail transportation uses a colossal 68% less energy than aircraft. In an article researched and written by Naomi Edwards, it was stated that a high-speed rail from Sydney to Melbourne would result in at least 3.6 billion passenger kilometres being diverted from car trips to trains. High-speed rail would also reduce the need for trucks on major arterial routes, particularly in suburban regions where population density is high or where traffic movement is high. It will significantly decongest roads near the high-speed rail and also cities with high-speed rail stations. Research by Consolidated Land and Rail Australia states that freight will be carried on high-speed rail trains at a slower speed. When safety is taken into account, the risk of injuries and accidents are significantly less than on a high-speed rail. Measured in passenger kilometres, the risk on a car journey is 127 times higher than on a high-speed rail, according to Pro Rail Alliance. From 2006 to 2015, the risk of fatality for car occupants was 75 times higher than rail passengers. To contradict the opposition, the Department of Infrastructure and Regional Development states that in 2016, 1,300 lives were lost on Australian roads due to fatigue, distraction and unfavourable weather. These issues would be eliminated with a high-speed rail network. Since 1970, our population has doubled, growing dramatically from 12 million to 24 million. Today, our greenhouse gas emissions have severely increased. Travel is extremely busy, and there are far too many accidents on our roads. A high-speed rail will reduce car accidents, which will result in lower insurance premiums. Lower premiums will be a financial saving for every family with a car. Our opposition's arguments fail to account for the impacts this will cause on Australian families, let alone the cost for families that actually have 2 cars. Thousands of people commute daily to cities for employment. The time taken for this journey is quite often over 2 hours each way to and from work. This is a total of 4 hours travelling in a car every day. If we take a normal working career, spanning from the age of 20 to the current retirement age of 67, this figure multiplies out to over 5 years of one's life driving in a car, polluting the environment, and dealing with constant delays in traffic. It is clear that my opposition is happy to waste 5 years of their life driving, but my team and I are not. How amazing would it be to have a cup of tea or read a book in luxurious facilities? Imagine being paid an extra 2 hours each way to and from work. The time one enters a train because of internet access and office cubicles. That would be a life with high-speed rail. Thank you.
And over $70 billion later, what have we gained? Debt, a torn-up countryside, dead Australian native animals, and nothing to show for the destruction that we have caused. Good afternoon, Ms Morgan, Mr Fish, Mrs Wells, students and teachers. My name is Kimberly de Jong, and by this point you have now heard some pathetic reasons as to why this railway train is a good idea, and quite a few amazing reasons for why it's such a terrible idea. Does Australia need a high-speed railway train? This is one of the many questions that you must ask yourselves. But by now, after hearing all the facts and statistics that my team has provided you with, the answer that should come straight to your mind is no, we do not need a high-speed railway train. The reason for not needing a high-speed railway train is really quite simple, and anyone who tells you otherwise needs to reconsider their train of thought and needs to get it back on track. The reason for this is because, as Maddie said, Australia really doesn't have a high demand for public transport. In fact, we don't have any demand for public transport. Another issue that Maddie explained was that the government would fund this little project of theirs. But where does this $50 to $70 billion come from? Do they have a secret stash of money? The answer to that question would be no. The money they need will come from Australian taxpayers, which is no surprise. But do you really want to pay this for a train to be built? My answer would be no, especially if you live someplace completely isolated from the train, such as the people in pretty much all states other than New South Wales, Victoria and ACT. Getting this high-speed railway track, it will put shipping companies out of work and put trucks out of work. The train will not affect people living in the city unless they are travelling directly to other cities. High-speed trains will cause more devastation than anything to our beloved natural environment, as Danny pointed out. It will certainly speed up the extinction of many of our already endangered animals. 2 species of birds have been lost to high-speed railway trains, as Danny had said. How many more species do we need to lose before we come to our senses and realise that high-speed railway trains are just a no-go? Danny also mentioned that over 400 elephants were killed in East India from the high-speed railway alone. Just imagine what would happen to our endangered species, such as the brush-tailed wallaby and the yellow-footed wallaby. Not to mention the stress it would put on our animals' food chains. Our land is one of our most sacred places, as it provides food, water and shelter for every living organism on the planet, including us. Building this railway train will also cause erosion, particularly in the areas dug up for this high-speed killer. And what about us, the passengers? One wombat is enough to derail a whole train. That never happens in Europe and Asia, you may say, but do they have wombats? No. And just how fatal would one crash be? A train in Spain derailed in 2013. 79 people out of 222 were killed, 140 injured. Do you mean to tell me that the risk is worth these people's lives? George went into depth about all the financial issues this high-speed track could potentially cause. These include the overall cost, the debt it will put Australia in, and the much more economically beneficial alternatives for Australia. $70 billion is a lot of money, so let's put it into perspective. To build an average Australian house, it costs $300,000. So if we divide $70 billion by 300,000, we can build 2,333,333 houses. That is a lot of houses that we can build over in undeveloped countries, or to help those in our struggling country, in our own country. Here's an idea. How about the government puts more focus on the poor people of our nation rather than spending billions of dollars on the rich? Should Australia spend to install a high-speed railway between Melbourne and Sydney? No, it should not. This train will derail our future off the rails. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, opposition, and esteemed judges, Ms. Morgan, Mr. Fish, and Mrs. Wells. First of all, the opposition's belief that high-speed rail would damage the environment is completely absurd. The truth is that thousands of animals are killed or cause accidents on Australian roads each year. New South Wales Roads and Maritime Services claim that 1 in 5 crashes on rural roads involve an animal. If a high-speed system was implemented from Sydney to Melbourne, our roads would be safer with a lot less animal casualties. The high-speed lines would be mainly straight track, secured on the sides so animals couldn't get in. In the case of India, it's a third world country, and I think elephants can probably break through fences. I couldn't see a wombat getting through one of the fences that they're planning to put around this rail. Also, you can believe your point about not having wombats in other countries is completely irrelevant. They may not have wombats, but we don't have elephants. 80% of Australia's population lives on its eastern coastline. That's approximately 19 million people, including us, whose only options for interstate travel are flying or driving. Flight has been shown to have one of the highest impacts on climate change, closely followed by car travel. Australia's high-speed rail, or HSR, would be powered by renewable energy, created by our own wind and solar farms, as Emily stated. Therefore, by building a high-speed rail system, we will be reducing our climate change costs by 75% compared to flight, and 70% compared to driving. It has been estimated that Australia's annual reduction in greenhouse gases would start at $140 million per annum, so don't even talk to me about costs. This means that the high-speed system is expected to reduce our net greenhouse gas emissions by 1.3 million tonnes of CO2 in its first year of operations. As there is already a rail system existing between Sydney and Melbourne, half of the work is already done. All that would be left to do is to switch the infrastructure to high speed and build the trains. Even though what's left of the construction would produce emissions, these would then stop once the building was completed. Ultimately, it's the choice whether or not to stop on one final dose or continue to rely on the drug that is oil in the fashion the opposition is willing to. Altogether, we are behind in this race. We have trapped ourselves in our fear of change, denying ourselves the luxury of high-speed travel. And now it is time to stop. Call us dreamers, but with Australia's contribution to helping our planet so close to reality, the cost should mean nothing. So we say yes, if it helps us create jobs or even boost our environment and economy at the same time. Then we say yes, it's worth the risk. We already have budgets for welfare and overseas aid, and most of what goes overseas is paid by for you and us. So what would be the difference? So we ask you now to say yes. Yes to high-speed rail for a better future. Thank you.
Just while the judges are doing that, while we're waiting for the judges, thank you. Again, you know you're doing this next year. This has been totally managed by the teams. Any internal politics, what to research, their speeches. The teams have done this all themselves. Okay, in, what was it, 2.5 weeks? 3 hours at 1 a.m. for some of them. Okay, so 0 to 100 kilometres an hour or 250 if you're in a high-speed train to get it done. Okay, can I ask your team to hop up here and your team to hop up here while we wait for the answers? Can the next teams please move into their spots, thanks? Okay guys, we have some results. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Black and Mr. Otter. I appreciate we don't have much time, so we'll try to cover this I'll try to cover it as efficiently as we can. All three of us, of course. Where did you guys go? Over there. Congratulations. I mean, fantastic debate. It took us a while because we couldn't decide. That was what the problem was. It was what you'd expect out of a debate. It was a genuinely close contest with people engaging with each other's ideas, people challenging the other side, people presenting really compelling material and doing it in a generally very convincing way. So it made it very hard for us to decide. We were still debating at the end about which way it should go and why. In the end, we've decided very narrowly indeed that the debate has gone to the negative team because you were sitting on the wrong side, on the negative team, right? The negative team.
Good job.
Thank you.
There was outstanding research from both sides. The amount of material that you accessed, the amount of information that you presented to us was truly impressive. Generally, you used it really effectively. You didn't just say it and let it go. Each side tried to engage with what the opposition was saying, tried to challenge it, and sometimes did that really well. You all spoke very well, spoke very clearly, spoke very confidently. A couple of you read a little bit too much, and that detracted a little bit from your ability to engage with us. But yeah, it was a fantastic debate. Why did we give it to the negative? Very narrowly. We just felt that overall their case held together slightly more consistently. It was just a little bit more cohesive than the affirmative side. That they were able to blend their ideas together a little more effectively and just show that they were had a slightly stronger argument. Thank you. I know we've got to...
Thank you.
Good morning, fellow guests, ladies and gentlemen, respective colleagues and judges. I'm Kirsten Fraser, and I'm not here to convince you, ladies and gentlemen. No. I'm here to tell you how a high-speed rail from Sydney to Melbourne is going to change all your lives for the greater good. I'll be introducing this argument. Lan, our second speaker, will be talking finance. Brighton, our third speaker, will be discussing environment. And Rhiannon, our fourth speaker, will be discussing the benefits of high-speed rail, as well as summing up our argument. There are many countries that have made the leap into the future of high-speed rail. Some you would expect, others you wouldn't. There's one notable country missing from this list. A country that has been at the forefront of medical and scientific research, with inventions such as penicillin and spray-on skin. Yes, Australia, a so-called first world country with a third world rail system. And my opponents will argue to keep us into the 19th century instead of leaping forward into the 21st and beyond. It currently takes around 11 hours to get from Sydney to Melbourne by train, 10 hours by car. With high-speed rail, there's none of that. Using Japan's bullet train as an example, with speeds between 240 to 320 kilometres per hour, you would be in Melbourne in around 3 hours. These people over to my left will argue erosion, environmental damage. It'll be too hard and too expensive. But as Australians, we are big dreamers. Look at the Snowy Mountain scheme, a grand plan to divert a river system through and over Australia's largest mountain range. An engineering wonder of the world that we were told would be too hard and too expensive, yet we did it. In China, high-speed rail passenger numbers have gone from an average of 370 million to 1.5 billion this year. A very good revenue maker for the Chinese government. Think of the number of people taken off Chinese roads, thus leading to less car crashes and less pollution. According to ABC.net, road crashes cost the Australian economy $27 billion a year. The injuries and death that are caused by car crashes occur because of the tyranny of distance in Australia. In just 2016, around 1,300 people died on the road. A high-speed rail would help to improve these statistics. My respective opponents will argue costs, ladies and gentlemen, but I ask you, what price for a human life? According to ABC.net, the average price for a house in Sydney is $1,100,000. This is due to the need of people working in Sydney, living in Sydney. This demand for Sydney property will fall if we can defeat the tyranny of distance in Australia. A high-speed rail system will allow this, helping to drive down expensive property prices. We all experience delays when we travel, either by car, train, plane, or our current rail system. In 2016, 95,000 domestic flights were delayed in Australia. Compare this to Japan's bullet train, average delays of 36 seconds. The biggest contributor to global warming and global pollution is the internal combustion engine. Yes, my friends, the good old car. Well, high-speed rail worldwide have shown they take cars off the road, helping our environment in the process. Ladies and gentlemen, let's start now. Let's take Australia, our incredible country, out of the 19th century, the age of the steam train, and into the 21st. Let's lay the rails for our future. Thank you.
So before I get into my argument, I'm just going to quickly say this. So whether or not you're getting people off the road, what about our ever-increasing population? Do you have the ability to increase the size of your trains before it's been built? Okay. Good afternoon, judges, peers and opposition. My name is Roy Munn, and today my team and I stand before you to discuss the reasons why Australia will struggle with such a large project as a high-speed railway, which plans to connect Melbourne and Sydney, and in later years Brisbane to Sydney and Canberra to Sydney. I will discuss Australia's finances and the cost of such a project. Hannah Walker, our second speaker, will discuss the environmental factors that affect the project and Australia's lack of population density. Joel Duncan, our third speaker, will discuss the impracticality of this project. And our final speaker, Lucy Heber, will discuss the maintenance needed and natural events that could affect the high-speed railway. I shall begin by putting Australia's financial position into perspective. Australia's debt has been increasing due to the government's constant borrowing of money from nations like China, growing 20% of debt, which is about $130 billion, to pay for projects we could not afford. And then practical use of money. For example, the Gonski project, which ended with $14.5 billion being wasted due to how much it cost. With this to put in mind, it shouldn't be a surprise when you realise that Australia's federal debt is $500 billion and our foreign debt is $1 trillion, proving that even try to begin this project would increase Australia's debt drastically. Now I'll discuss the cost for the high-speed railway. So the high-speed railway will cost $114 billion due to the tunnelling being the best course of action taken by the government, and every kilometre the track costs $20 million. The annual interest of this project is planned to be 4%, which is $960 million. And the upfront cost is planned to be $24 billion, meaning that it will take decades for this project to be paid off. But the cost doesn't end with the project itself. For the high-speed railway, we need to cover the cost of the hired staff, and the maintenance of the train and its tracks, which will end in the cost of $9 billion. Now, to pay off this cost, the government will have to rely on the ticket sales. For the help, they will have to sell one-way tickets at $1,000 to 12 million people, which means on a daily basis about 33,000 people would have to buy tickets, which contests with the amount of people who get planes on a daily basis to Sydney to Melbourne, which are 44,000 people. If the tickets were planned to be easy to purchase, let's say $150 to travel both ways, they would need to sell 80 million tickets, with 219,000 people a day buying tickets. With these prices in mind, I do believe many in the crowd, including myself, prefer to get a trip by plane due to the average price being $110 a ticket, making it easier for people to travel. I'll finish by giving an example of a failed attempt on constructing one of these large and expensive projects. In 2008, California made a vote. If the public was willing to construct a high-speed railway from San Francisco and would go down to the Orange County. Voters were told the construction will only cost $40 billion, but with a constant, quote, volley of antagonistic litigation, end quote, the words of the San Francisco curb, and the challenges presented by the Trump administration, has caused the project to increase $64 billion, leading the construction to slowly but steadily stop, making it a train to nowhere. With this information provided, it proves that with the future hard to predict, to trust in such a large project is an absurd idea with a chance to truly destroy Australia's now failing economy, and why Australia shouldn't risk a project like this for some time.
Is it worth it? That's probably the question that's gone through your mind. Ladies and gentlemen, teachers and judges, after hearing the statements I'm going to make, I'll assure you that 100% financially, the high-speed railroad between Sydney and Melbourne will be worth it. The current cost to buy the land is $720 million, which is being paid by the New South Wales and Victorian government. If no action is taken now, the land value will increase to around about $3.5 billion. That is $2.78 billion that we could reinvest into vulnerable resources towards the railway system. The whole project, including the land, costs a total of $200 billion, which is being all paid by a private Australian-owned company called the Car Project, which is the consolidated land of Australia. Now, how are they going to get the money from this? That's simple. That's through a process called land value capture, which is the use of proceeds from the increased in values of land and property due to transport and other infrastructure being built nearby. Clyde has plans for 8 cities being built near the railway, 2 in Victoria and 6 in New South Wales. With these cities being built near the railroad and the infrastructure involved, with these cities being built near the railroad and the infrastructure involved in the cities, the costs will be easily negated. Whilst these costs are being negated, this also fixes another problem, current problem and a future problem, which is population overgrowth. Sydney is currently experiencing a huge population overgrowth. The Clara Project states that by 2050, Australia will be increased by 14 million citizens. Now, Now, you may be asking, how are these cities easily overpopulated? That comes down to 2 simple points: money and transportation issues. The average Australian adult earns about $80,000. And the reason why the majority of Sydney is overpopulated is the average price in Sydney is $1.1 million. Now, this is extremely unaffordable for an average Australian citizen in Sydney. With the cities being built near the railroad, the average house price goes down to $440,000, which is affordable. And moving to these, either to Melbourne or to any of these cities, could either take 30 minutes or to around about 1 hour and 30 minutes, due to the train being able to reach a top speed of 600 kilometres an hour. This is not the only way Australia will make its money back. Major retailers like Amazon, which is moving here in June 25th of 2018, eBay, Dick Smith, JB Hi-Fi, all these major retailers will utilise the rail line, transporting stock or goods between areas. The high-speed rail is worth it in the long run. And with all these retailers using it and the amount of people going back and forth, goods being transported, and tickets being paid for, Australia will make its money back. And let us lay the rails for our future. Thank you for listening.
Despite Australia's wealth and abundance of key commodities such as the high-grade iron ore needed to build high-speed rail networks, we are a relatively poor candidate for high-speed rail for similar reasons to the United States. Australia shares many characteristics with the United States regarding this, such as our lack of population density, our unique model of urban and suburban development, and the strength of our property rights. According to World Bank, America's population density is low, at 33 people per square kilometre. Now, this in comparison with Australia's happens to be significantly lower at just 3.1 people per square kilometre. Evidence allows us to state that population density is probably the single biggest factor in determining the economics of high-speed rail. Many people claim that high-speed trains emit a lot less CO2 emissions compared to an aeroplane, but of course you would also have to take into account the energy-intense construction phase. You also have to consider the energy mix once the high-speed train is in operation. Even if the trains run constantly at 350 kilometres per hour, the fastest trains in Europe, China and Japan only run at 320 kilometres maximum. In all the publicity we are seeing at the moment concerning the advantages and feasibility of high-speed rail travel, no one is mentioning the fact that to attain these maximum high speeds, the track must be straight and level. Any deviation from this straight and level track means that the train must slow from its maximum speed. Otherwise, it cannot operate safely according to the High-Speed Rail Research Commission. The high-speed rail would have to have non-stop connections between the city centres of Sydney, Melbourne and Canberra. This is because it takes a while to slow down and also to accelerate. This is not only time-consuming, but also very energy-intense. There is no way of actually getting this high-speed rail into the CBD due to the fact that there has never been any original planning done for the project by Australia's city planners. In order to see this project succeed, government would have to undergo a compulsory acquisition of land, meaning that residents who are in the chosen path of the high-speed rail line would have to sell their houses against their will. I don't know about my opposition, but my team and I would not be pleased if we were forced to sell our houses against our will to allow for the construction of something that is not only going to be a drain on the country, but will also just need to be propped up by taxpayer dollars. Not only would this high-speed rail line be the cause of people losing their homes, it would also rely on the use of farmlands. Would farmers really be agreeable when it came to large, cumbersome train lines cutting paddocks in half? And what happens when in a few years the government built fences age and allow for livestock to have fences onto the rails? And who exactly is responsible for the upkeep of these fences built in order to stop livestock and Australia's native animals, many of which are protected, from straying into the path of oncoming trains, which, may I remind you, at those speeds would mean near instant death to the animal and the possibility of derailing an entire train full of passengers. Time and time again in Australia, we are bombarded through the media with the message that speed kills. This has been illustrated in the high-speed rail disasters around the world, where the extreme speed of the trains causing a much larger impact has resulted in higher fatality numbers than would have been seen if the trains were travelling at lesser speeds. The German high-speed rail disaster in 1998 saw the death of 101 people when the train crashed at a speed of 200 kilometres an hour. And then again in 2013, a high-speed train travelling in Spain derailed at high speed on a bend with 79 deaths and 140 injured. This train was travelling at a speed of 160 kilometres an hour. None of these trains were travelling anywhere near the speeds expected to be reached by the proposed high-speed rail system in Australia. Now, I must ask my opposition, is it really worth the risk? Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to ask you a quick question. Would you rather be waiting around in a cold, wet airport, waiting for your flight that may not even arrive, or jump on the high-speed rail and arrive at your destination within minutes with no disruptions? I sure know what I would rather do. So, good afternoon, debaters, judges, and audience. Today I will be stating and proving to you why the high-speed rail will be an efficient alternative. high-speed rail will play a major role in tackling climate change around the world. The speed rail, powered by clean energy, will get people out of their cars and off planes. Okay. So, we really will be speeding in the right direction, so let's lay the rails to our future. Since electricity is an energy carrier, the high-speed rail's fuel can be generated by a mix of sources that will incorporate geothermal, hydro, solar, and wind energy that will be produced in the years ahead. And because electric motors are 3 to 4 more times efficient than the internal combustion engines in cars, an immediate improvement will be made. The internal combustion engine is one of the major reasons for global warming. This is a threat to the environment and can lead to pollution, which is another major problem in our society. So a great option to change this will be to use renewable energy and clean energy. The high-speed rail can benefit your travel in many ways. It allows you to have comfort through rough wind and rainy days. We're comparing the plane to the high-speed rail. Speed rail is in many ways more compatible way to travel in bad weather. With planes, you put up with turbulence and a whole lot of other things to get on your flight. The bad weather can influence your comfortability, whereas the high-speed rail won't be delayed on any occasion. According to Federal Aviation Administration, the largest cause of air traffic delay in the national airspace system is the weather. Out of all the impacting delays from 2008 to 2016, 69% of delays are caused by the weather conditions on planes. According to the National Railway and Safety, about 13% of trains are delayed by weather from 2014 to 2016, which is nothing compared to the amount of flights delayed. Hope you're on my side of the rails. Let's stay on track together. Let's lay the rails to our future. Thank you.
Thank you.
I feel privileged to be here to speak about the. I feel privileged to be here to speak to you today about the many government-related issues concerning the high-speed rail. I will also be informing you why air travel is a preferable alternative to an aged and unaffordable high-speed rail. The entire idea of a high-speed rail was merely an election promise. And if you investigate various previous governments, you'll discover that not many of them have lived up to their promises. Budget deficit is the amount in which government expenditure exceeds income. According to ANZ research, a graph shows that Australia has an average budget deficit of $30 billion from the past 4 years. This means the Australian government is spending more money than it earns. The Australian government, like many other nations, is stuck in a deep pocket of debt. Imagine if we saved the money on building the high-speed rail and spent it on making Australia one step closer to being debt-free. After hearing this, wouldn't you agree? It would be political suicide to spend money on something we simply can't afford. If the government did decide to build the high-speed rail, would it ever be likely that this rail system will become profitable? This financial outlay in establishment and maintenance is significant, and the usage by travelling public unreliable. This is an enormous gamble when other methods of transport are in place and successful. Haven't you heard? We have a thing called planes now, and in the long run, they will be cheaper than your high-speed rail. Moreover, there are plans to build a new airport close to Sydney suburbs in motion, according to Minister Darren Chester for Infrastructure and Transport. This makes the need for high-speed rail even less. Air travel is more flexible in adjusting to demand. For example, as planes are smaller, they can travel more frequently and adapt to passenger demand. Whereas it is harder for a train to respond as quickly and or efficiently. The whole idea for a high-speed rail is to move people from Melbourne to Sydney. Say you're a businessman based in Melbourne and you had a meeting in Sydney. By the time the high-speed rail was created, we'd have the technology to construct a hologram representing the same businessman in Sydney. I'm simply exaggerating one of our main points. It would take decades to build the high-speed rail, whether the rate in technological electronic communication, such as video conferencing, or maybe even holograms, will negate the need for people to travel to meetings. If the train was built, it would reduce the amount of air travel to and from Sydney and Melbourne. Qantas offers the most flights between Melbourne to Sydney out of any airline. Qantas is an Australian company and contributes to 0.7% of Australia's GDP, gross domestic product. This shows the strength of the country's economy. The rail would reduce the amount of flights required and therefore reduce air travel's contribution to Australian GDP, therefore lowering Australia's GDP and world ranking. Whilst our opposition might be willing to pay for a high-speed rail they can't use for another decade, I can think of countless other sectors I'd rather spend my money in. Future needs for high-speed rail will decline in the expansion of technology. In other words, this train is just a really fast dinosaur waiting to become extinct. Thank you.
After all you've heard, and you're still questioning the options, there is only one option. Australia should spend the necessary money on installing the high-speed rail between Sydney and Melbourne. Good afternoon, fellow debaters, judges, and audience. I'm Rhiannon. Today, I'll be concluding this argument and proving to you how beneficial this speed rail is. Look, we need this speed rail. Not only will it bring a mass amount of job opportunities for so many communities, it's the exact economic bang our country needs. And today, ladies and gentlemen, you have heard so many facts that are backed up with reliable resources from my fellow teammates today. So it's obvious that the speed rail needs to happen. The first area I need to address is jobs. The unemployment rate has grown higher and higher each coming year, with the ABC stating that rates have grown to as high as 5.8% in the past 3 years from the former amount of 746,600 unemployed people in New South Wales. As explained on news.com.au, it is definitely the right time for the speed rail to come to life. It will bring all communities in this region together. Isn't that what we all want? Harmony? The speed rail will also make our country more industrialised, bringing us out of the 19th century and into the 21st and beyond. In general, all over the world, speed rails have worked so well in other countries. As previously mentioned by Kirsten, they have made a big impact on people in China and Japan. It brings down fatality rates enormously. As of 2015, car crash fatalities were 5.08% per 100,000 people. To add to this, between 1990 and 2011, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics shows that nearly 900,000 people died in highway crashes, while fewer than 15,000 died in train collisions. And in the past 30 years, in France and Japan, not one passenger has died due to a train collision. As stated by Lon, the subject of affordability and financial sustainability about this topic is all beneficial in the long run. Not only will Australia regain the money spent on this gainful infrastructure, but it will also help people with sustaining and upholding job positions and be environmentally supportive for our communities. Not to mention that our countryside is perfect for this sort of transportation, and it's better and safer for the environment. So our opposing debaters don't need to worry. And as mentioned by Brighton, the pollution rates of cars and planes are a lot higher than trains. According to the National Geographic, there is a new fear of flying. You are most likely to die from exposure to toxic pollutants in a plane exhaust than in a plane crash. As stated by Rory, he'd rather fly, suffocating from the toxins of a plane. Planes kill. I'd rather pay a small amount for a train ticket than losing a big amount on my life or anyone else's. I mean, how could you argue from this development from occurring? You should be fighting for it. The infrastructure that's already in these areas is outdated. We are paying taxes to the government and they aren't doing anything about the transportation issues. This is what we want our money spent on. More safer, more updated means of transportation. Also, dollars spent that get Americans out of cars will ease traffic, save money, reduce pollution, slow global warming and make us less vulnerable to volatile oil auctions from Bloomberg. This also goes for Australia. And to encapsulate, the speed rail should most definitely be a near future we should all be considering and realising it's what our country needs to continue our economical growth. Do our opposing debaters still think we're dreaming? I'm Rhiannon Collins, and myself and my colleagues are all for speed rail. Thank you for listening. Now let's lay the rails for our future.
What a lively debate this has been so far. Luckily, my team was notified of basic debate etiquette. I'm Lucy, and today I will be speaking about potential damage through natural and manual incidents and their effects. I would like to start with some notes from my teammates with regarding to previous arguments. The high-speed rail will not be delayed on any occasion. This is a false statement, as there has been no guarantee made regarding it. The comments about jobs and employment opportunities. It will be privately built, so it won't create new jobs in rural areas, and these jobs, even so, will only be temporary. Okay, so the thought of this idea being implemented at first is, well, great, but then you get down to consideration. Is it really worth it? Even if we somehow manage to eventually get the system installed and running, shove the pounding dead out of mind, as well as the spitting thoughts the project will never pay itself off, that should be the end all, right? We can deal with all those issues later, right? Wrong. Unfortunately, with such a huge installation within the society, it becomes massive upkeep and annual cost, of course on top of the likeliness we will already be losing money by then. These anxiety-building and costly upkeeps are usually either due to natural disasters causing intrusion or the damage of some kind, or just simple neglect to care of the system. Take, for example, the Black Saturday bushfires. The Black Saturday bushfires were a series of bushfires that ignited or were burning across the Australian state of Victoria on and around Saturday the 7th of February 2009, and were Australia's all-time worst bushfire disasters. 173 people were killed, and the fires occurred exactly where the high-speed train is planning to run. They proceeded up the coast and stretched from Melbourne to Sydney and even slightly beyond. Now what a shame that would be for your precious rail to be shut down due to an irreversible and unpreventable event. Imagine the money lost from the train possibly being shut down. Yes, numerous other countries may have that issue too. However, they have a much smaller landmass, a much smaller train system, and therefore for them, a much smaller effect would be made. For example, a bushfire earlier this year in September in the Glasshouse Mountains damaged the Queensland rail infrastructure, forcing trains on the Sunshine Coastline to be suspended for the rest of the day. The Queensland Rail Company announced just before 2 p.m. that day that the trains between Beerwah and Caboolture were suspended for 2 days due to damage sustained to overhead line equipment from the bushfire, and that was only mild and in a small area. Imagine the jobs at risk and the potential threat of damage to the passengers at the time, not to mention the general inconvenience. Now that's just bushfire occurrences. Faulty tracks such as broken rails, switch damage, thermal buckling, or created embankments due to flooding are a cause for concern with regards to unsafe operation. Strong crosswinds also have in fact caused the train to push off the tracks once before. The train itself, as well as the operational conditions, will usually influence the outcome of an unsafe situation. The risk of serious consequences of collisions, derailments, and train turnover is more serious if the speed is high and the carriage body structure is weak. Some train vehicle designs have the ability to hold the train almost centrally aligned and upright above the track after derailment, a property called derailment worthiness, something the proposed construction does not include. The unavoidable risks of manual error and upkeep of the train propose a never-ending financial cycle and need for repairs, as well as the money and time lost to have the risk of train being shut down for a period of time. Let's be real here. We most certainly could afford to go without it, but to go with it, now that is a strain on finances, harsh use of natural resources, a threat of damage on the natural environment, a cause of so very many deaths, and a never-ending financial cycle of repairs, and not to mention a political hellhole. And all for what? So we can have the unnecessary luxury of a train. Thank you.
Sorry, I know it's almost time to go, so I'm going to be really quick and brief. I wanted to say congratulations to both teams on this occasion. I think it's a really exciting thing, debates, and it's evident how much effort both teams have put into their arguments. So I know that myself and the rest of the judges were incredibly impressed. But due to a sophisticated and a well-developed argument, we had no choice but to choose Mr. Clayton's team. So well done.